What's up, bookworms? Welcome back to Abe Speaks. Got chapter 3 of Economic Facts and Fallacies going to be reviewed today. And as you saw in the title, it's going to be over male, female facts and fallacies. I know I said previously in another video I was going to break this up into two chapters at a time, but this chapter is pretty heavy and I wanted to be able to discuss and get these things out and make sure that I gave it its due diligence. So, without further ado, right to it. Alright, now one of the things I said that I really enjoyed about the previous chapters is that he asks a question which really gets you involved and helps you understand and see what's actually going on. For instance, he starts it off, in most societies, for most of history, when women have earned lower incomes than men, that fact is not in dispute. What is open to question and what has generated many fallacies have been various attempts to explain this fact. So what he's basically saying is, rather than jumping to conclusion and stating that it's automatically discrimination, let's look into see what other factors are playing into these, this wage gap, or playing into these inequalities that are being said, that are being stated. So he's just saying, let's just look into see, let's do our research rather than stating that something is a fact. All right? Because remember, correlation is not what? Causation. All right. Now he goes on and points out the cultural differences in raising, how boys and girls are raised differently, which actually contributes to developing different levels and kinds of knowledge, skills, and work experience. Excuse me. And which leads me into the next point that he discusses here within the chapter is the development of machines has mostly eliminated the physical demand in some industries. And he's stating like mining, shipping, and metallurgy. So throughout history, predominantly most of the jobs were what? Agricultural, really hands-on jobs. And what did that require? Due to genetic differences and just overall biological differences, men were predominantly stronger than women in most cases. So men did a majority of that work. And so culturally throughout history, you saw those trends go on. And what he's saying is that the development of machines has actually taken out that it's not that as much of a physical demand to meet those job requirements, thankfully, to machines. So that's one of the things that's actually helped lessen the wage gaps as well. And among other physical differences that he highlights, obviously, and genetic differences, are that women give birth and what this plays into, and how this plays into women falling behind in income and in some instances competing with domestic responsibilities. All right. And he goes on to actually challenge this fact. I want to say that he's challenging this. He goes on to challenge this and stating that, remember, he's compounding and building on that thesis. He's on that foundation that he laid in the preface, introduction, in chapters 1 and 2. So he's building on that and giving you more and more facts to support that thesis. And what he goes here within, few societies have had such severe restrictions on the education of girls, at least not in the Western world. But whether or not to what degree employer discrimination exists or can explain much of the male-female income differences is a question, remember, rather than a foregone conclusion, all right? Rather than a foregone conclusion. And also, like I said, he goes on and leads into the physical differences of what childbearing has for women as well and how that plays a part in the income gap. And still in the first part of, he's giving you the history. He actually talks about the first 2 decades of the 20th century, meaning like the 10s and the 1910s, 1920s. It was actually the heyday of academic women, and this is going across all fields. So women were getting more doctorate degrees. Women were also being employed at an all-time high. And also what you see is the women's incomes was skyrocketing. And what he talks about is that the representation of women as well within the workforce and within higher education was more prominent then than it was prior to, not even prior to, but even after the actual laws being in the place of affirmative action or any type of, feminist movement. And this is what he's discussing and saying here within this chapter, which I found was very interesting. Continuing on, like I said, he talks about the representation of women in women's colleges was actually started to decline. And what he has here to support that was when not to support that, excuse me. What he has here is an interesting fact that correlates with this, is that most of the women who are working in these jobs were actually married. So elementary and secondary school teachers, most of them were married during this time of the heyday for academic women. And so he says what changed over time are women's marriage and childbearing patterns. And what he's talking about with that is women are actually getting married at a younger age, all right, at a younger age, and they're having children at a younger age. And what that does to you, what he continues on and has a, history part here. History shows that the career paths of women over the course of the 20th century bore little resemblance to a scenario in which variations in employer discrimination explained variations in women's career progress. And all of this was either before anti-discrimination laws or the rise of the feminist movement. And I thought that was very interesting. And he goes on to say that the median age of marriage declined, as did the number of women represented in high-level occupations among recipients of postgraduate degrees. And so what he's saying is that so whenever women are getting married and having children, what that does is that actually breaks up the continuity of their career, and that actually hinders them, which we'll get into in just a minute. In the second half of the century, women's rise back into the higher level positions rose as the median age for marriage rose. So you saw women getting married at a younger age, the incomes were lower, all right, because they had a break. One of the factors, there was a break in careers, all right, in the continuity of their job, of their employment. And so women are getting married at a later age, their incomes rise. But correlation is not causation. Correlation is not causation. And now he goes and targets occupational differences. Getting through here fast. Want to make sure you guys are getting an understanding here too, though. And when he targets the occupational differences, he does discuss that some women do choose careers that pay less, that just generally pay less. No one's like making them choose these occupations, although it is something that they're passionate about. But it's just unfortunate that the occupation that they are passionate about actually pays them less than, other occupations. It's unfortunate, but it's the reality. And one of the things he says here, that he states here, partly due to, the distribution of women and men in various occupations has long deferred. Partly due to restrictions placed on women, yes, that is part of it, and partly due to choices made by women themselves. So yes, he's understanding that, there could be and has been, restrictions amongst women in the workforce, of course, but we're not going to say that that's going to be the ultimate thing as to what's happening currently. All right, that's what he's saying, currently. In 1 second here, there's a little excerpt, and he says many social restrictions, especially in the past, have been based on attempts to forestall problems growing out of the attraction of the sexes for one another. So even I know I can even say in my fiance's job, couples or partners aren't allowed to work within the same company. It's not allowed to happen. Family members, possibly, but you're not allowed to work actually as a couple or as a family in the workplace. It's just not allowed. That's going on currently today in 2020. So, but in the past it was a lot more severe restrictions, which he states. All right, moving along here. All right, moving on to continuity of employment. So we talked about the continuity of employment of, what correlates of when women are married at a younger age versus when women are married at a later age. And I'm not saying this is just women, but majority of the examples that he has leading up to this point are majority for women. So that's why I'm giving this out. He does have things paying along that does discuss the income differences for men as well. All right, so that's coming up. And he talks about the continuity of employment. So men are actually less likely to have interruptions during their careers rather than women. And as we talked about before, it's just a genetic difference. It's a biological difference. Men are not able to go through the physical act of giving birth like that. But women are able to. And what does that mean? They're not able to. They have a break in their employment. Granted, if you're not fired, barring injury, anything like that, you're going to have a continuous work history as a man, majority of the time, more times than not, unless you're a stay-at-home father, but it's as rare. That's rare. And what we have here, and he goes on to talk about regular and irregular work. And so he talks about having it all, career, family, doing it all is often harder for women. And that's a fact. And, we talked about it. Coming off of childbirth, you're having a child, who knows what mental or emotional and physical changes that you just had to go through. And now you're having to go back into the workforce right off the bat. Who knows to say how you're feeling or how you're going to adjust to that. Sometimes women don't go back into the workforce for maybe a few years, and you have that break. And depending on your occupation, the field could possibly move past you. So that 2 years that you have here, that's gone. So now if you try to get back into that same field, this woman A had no break in her employment, but woman B had a break, so she's probably going to get it. Or guy A and going against woman B who had a break in her employment. Those things are playing against that as well. Not saying that that's the sole factor, but that's something that is discussed there. And women are less likely than men to choose occupations that require longer hours as well. And overall, but he talks about comparability, and a lot of the studies he talks about that I was really interested in, that really helped open up my eyes. They're really comparing apples. They're really comparing like apples to oranges in a lot of instances. Sorry, I'm shaking there. Comparing apples to oranges. So if you're comparing, woman A against woman B, woman A never had a break in her employment. Woman B was a stay-at-home mom for 15 years. And so they compare these two, and they're not the same, and say woman A. And so now you're talking about single women would make the same amount as men here, and that just wouldn't be the case. What they talk about is that you need to compare apples to apples, rather apples to oranges. And so sometimes they categorize people as being single as someone who was a recent divorcee. Say that he or she was a stay-at-home mom or father for 15 years, and that field moved past them. And he goes on to talk about the domestic responsibilities that are also split between both men and women, and the brunt of that work typically falls on the woman. It typically falls on the woman. And an interesting fact that I appreciate and that I liked about that was pretty interesting that he brought up within the book, within the chapter, was that for alimony, and having compensating for alimony or spousal support. Typically, like a majority of men, I'll say, that I've heard, and at least, some, not necessarily all the ones that I know, but a majority of men would say, it's unfair to have to give up half, you have to give these things up. But he brings a very, very interesting point that even I did not ever really think about. So say that, the wife or the stay-at-home mother, she's not working, right? She puts her career, her aspirations on the back end to take care of the domestic responsibilities, taking care of the home, taking care of the children, and the children are 18 years, right? And think about the income that was lost within the 18 years that could have been accumulated. Think about the 18 years of work experience and work history that could have been accumulated during that time that they missed out on, that they now have to play catch up to, and possibly then. I'm not saying, remember, not saying that it's fair, not saying that it's fair at all, but he does talk about and say that it is overwhelmingly different and more difficult for women in that regard. So I definitely understand that, and really opened up my eyes and helped me understand more and more of the intricacies that actually go into some of these. And also he talks about, there was an excerpt, I'm gonna go back just a little bit because I missed a really interesting excerpt here, and he talks about one second, guys. He goes on and talks about the interesting parts of domestic responsibilities and how that plays a part. And he also discusses the marriage typically has an opposite effect on women than it does for men. And we talked about some of the things that could hinder that. We talk about the cultural differences of how boys and girls are brought up within the cultures. We talk about occupational differences and occupational choices. Choosing and you having that choice, an option of picking a higher wage paying job or a lower wage paying job. You have that option. And also he goes into the continuity of work and how many are discussing how marriage affects the wage gap, how having children can affect the wage gap. You know, he goes into all of those factors, which is why I really wanted to make this chapter very detailed to make sure that you guys got an understanding, and that he talks about that as well. And another excerpt here that I told you I was getting to. This one I had. And he talks about here, as already noted, comparing never married women and men who are past the childbearing years and who both work full time in the 21st centuries shows women of this description earning more than men of the same description. And this goes as back as far as 1969. And another study showed in 1994 that men's beginning salaries for law school graduates was around $48,000, and for women overall was about 50,000. And that was 1994. All right, and they're comparing apples to apples in those instances. And he has it here in 2004. An even finer breakdown of the data to compare women and men of comparable ages, education, and employment histories showed the sexes much closer in earnings. And, you know, it's just one of the things that, you know, a lot of things can be spun. A lot of things you can be uneducated and ignorant about. And that's okay. But do not formulate your opinion if you have not read or done anything about it. All right, so that's all I'm saying. Just make sure that you educate yourself. Make sure you're diversifying your sources, diversifying the information that you're getting, and so then you can come to a conclusion that you have actually believed, rather than just spewing things that you haven't heard of or actually understood. Just a few more. All right, guys. I think it was pretty good here. Covered pretty much everything that we had. And well, there's one more thing, is that make sure that you're reading the very next book that I'm going to have coming out for you guys. It's going to be, you got, one that we had was The Ego Was the Enemy. That one's by Ryan Holiday. And the second that we're going to have is The Obstacle Is the Way, also by Ryan Holiday. Those are both on my Instagram on Abe Speak. So make sure that you're checking those out. And I'm going to have chapter 4 and 5. I'm going to merge those together because they are heavy, but I don't think as heavy as this one personally. But we're gonna have that one coming out for you guys, so make sure you like the video, subscribe it, share it, whatever it is, and I appreciate it, guys. Until the next one, peace out.